anxietycenter.com.
Hey, Jim, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Very, very well. Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Great, yeah. Sorry about that. I was just popping in and out. I was downtown working. Now I'm just on my way home, just driving.
Not a problem.
But,
yeah.
So first thing I guess I should say, I'm happy that you're doing better, for sure. I prayed for you. So it's great that you're back. I think you're making a really big positive impact in the world and with all of us in our lives. And so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for your prayers. And again, we're glad to help.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask something quickly, but just a bit of a backstory. I think you remember we spoke about a month or two ago.
Yes, I do.
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was having symptoms from brain trauma or damage and stuff.
Yeah.
So, well, basically, I've been in recovery for about 9 months now, and things have gotten much better, and a lot of my symptoms have gone away, and things are feeling much better overall.
Good.
So, yeah, I started working with Stacy since we last spoke, and even though it's been 9 months and I worked with Stacy for a few sessions, I still wanted to ask you about just containment, because I've made it this far without really knowing exactly how to contain or exactly how to push a fear. So just in terms of basics, I guess I kind of have my own way of doing it. So, but I kind of got confused with the amount of different cognitive strategies there were, and so I kind of just stopped my level 2 stuff and I just focused on level 1 for a long time.
Yeah.
And that made so that a lot of my symptoms and a lot of my fears kind of just went away on their own because my body and nervous system and brain all calmed down, which is great. But now I have to kind of focus on level 2 stuff again, and so because I really want to get to a point where I'm fully free from this completely.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Even now, before it's my turn to speak, I just get this surge of anxiety. I don't know why. I'm not sure what the core fear is and how to contain it properly. But usually, what I've been doing since the past few weeks or months is, if there's a situation like this that would cause me anxiety, I would just say that it's not worth me trying to fight through it. I'm just gonna not. I just avoided it. For example, before, if I was getting this stressed out before talking to you on the Skype call, I would just drop off the call and then not have to deal with it, because I was so focused on level 1 recovery first. But now I want to get to the point where I'm actually working through that stuff. So I guess just a general question and a specific question to apply to the containment and fear extinguish is before it's my turn to speak, I get a lot of anxiety. But then also just in general, I'm not sure exactly how it works. So maybe you can tell me about that.
Right. Well, typically when we're feeling anxious to speak is usually because we have some self-esteem concerns. We're afraid of being rejected, afraid of doing something, awkward that people make fun of, and that comes from a background. Certain kind of backgrounds will set us up for that, and then we just carry that approach to life because in the back of our mind we're always kind of concerned what people are going to think. If you look at some of the information we mentioned at the website, is that being loved and accepted is the number one motivating desire for all humans. And so we seek that out. We want that. And there's a reason for that. But the problem is when we grow up in families that maybe don't give us that positive feedback, affirmation, support us, all those kind of things, well, then we become hypersensitive to people rejecting us, and that becomes a threat. Well, what if I do something wrong and people make fun of me or reject me, and what if I'm left alone, or what if they think I don't know what I'm talking about? All those fears run through our mind in a split second, which makes us fearful. What if I embarrass myself? All those things. And so we overcome that threat by working on our view of ourself. And a lot of times what the therapist will do is they'll talk about where we came from, our backgrounds, how our parents treated us, did they validate us at all, where was our support, and so on and so forth. And as we look at our past, we realize, well, wow, I never really got the kind of love and and acceptance that I really desired, because if that's number one motivating desire for humans and I'm not getting it, there's a problem here. And we often as children blame ourselves. Well, okay, then what's wrong with me? But as adults, when we look back, we say, well, wait a minute, it wasn't me. It was how I was parented, or maybe how one parent treated me, or maybe how a relative treated me, or maybe how a school teacher, treated me in class and made fun of me or something. Whatever. We can always trace it back to a reason we formed that belief. Then when we look back at it with adult eyes, we say to ourselves, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't a me issue. That was the way they treated me. So I'm not going to own that. And so we come into a different view of ourselves just by understanding the first view we got and why it's not helpful to us. Secondly, as a Christian, we can draw back on how God values us. For example, that was really important for me. Being a short male, I was often ridiculed and made fun of, and got all the short jokes you can think of. And so I felt really inferior, insecure in myself until I became a Christian, realized, well, wait a minute, I didn't pick my body size. God picked it for me. And if he thought it was important for me to be this size, then I should think it's important for me to be this size. So I'm going to accept it. And people who do the ridiculing, they're the ones that have the problem. Because I would never ridicule for someone the way they look or whatever, because I realize God created us in our own way for specific reasons. So my self-worth came from my relationship with God and how he viewed me. So that was, again, another way I could move out of feeling insecure, making mistakes. Another thing, boundaries was important for me. Once I realized that everybody makes mistakes, healthy people won't ridicule someone for making a mistake. An unhealthy person would. Well, the unhealthy person has the problem. It's not a me issue, it's a them issue. So I was able to separate all that stuff. So when I go into social situations now, I just be myself. And people respond to me the way they respond, and whichever way they respond, that's up to them, not up to me. So I've moved away from all those kind of things just by doing that underlying factor work and knowing where my self-esteem issues came from. So that's kind of some of the ways we can move through that. So when we go to speak, we don't have to be nervous about what we say because we have a different mindset about what that means to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So is it even in my mind, I don't know if it's even possible for people to not be nervous before speaking. I feel like it's a very common thing, and especially before public speaking. So is it possible to really get to that point where you don't feel nervous to speak before
yes.
a crowd, or really?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, you mentioned an important thing. One time it was the people would fear speaking in public more than they would fear dying. That's how common it is. But you can get to that place of being so confident. This preparedness helps. Being confident in what you're saying, taking a different view of why you're saying what you're saying can all make a difference in terms of the level of nervousness a person experiences before they do things in public.
Okay. So all those things that you were talking about before, working on the self-esteem and the different, I guess, containment strategies that you were saying, how would I apply this to containing? Because if I was to extinguish the fear of not being loved or accepted, then I think if I'm right, then you would just have to contain it over and over whenever it comes up, and then that would extinguish the fear. Is that how it works?
Well, you would first address the fear. You would look at that fear, why you have it, and you'd find ways of saying, well, I don't have to be afraid of that no more. And that's the statements you'd use to contain it, because containing just for the containment's sake is very limited in terms of its power and its sustainability. It just, it's like saying affirmations. You can say all day long that I'm a good person, but if you don't believe it, it's really not going to make much of a difference. But if you have reasons to believe what you're containing is true, that make a world of difference. Now, we still have to convince our old belief system to change. That's the limbic lag and all those things that the body also has a reticular activating system that will reject new information and only accept what we already know. So we have to work through that process. But when we have good statements that we believe are true and we're using those to contain ourselves, we can get to a place that's completely different from where we started.
Okay, because it's kind of strange, because whenever I try to use a statement, it feels like the statement loses its power after I use it a couple of times, or a few days in or something. It's kind of I don't know, it's I don't know, now it's not novel anymore, and it's just okay, it doesn't work for some reason. I don't know why that happens.
Well, I think it happens because you're not really convinced it's true. You don't have sufficient reasons to believe the containment statement is actually true. And so it feels more like an affirmation than actually something that's convincing. And that's why we think it's so important to go after those threats and beliefs with what we now believe is true, And that's why going back to those events and looking at them with adult eyes and saying, well, wait a minute, I made a mistake here concluding that that was my fault. There's where the blame lies. And we don't lay blame to make other people feel guilty or whatever. We do it so we understand where the belief statement come from. And then, because when we also do that, we can also reach a place of forgiveness too, recognizing that, if it came from, let's say, for example, if your parents were overcritical of you growing up, well, they were overcritical of you not because they wanted to ruin your life, but probably because their parents were overcritical as well, because at that particular time in history, that's how parents thought that they could get the best out of their children. And so that just gets passed down the line and we get it. But as a child, we think, okay, what's wrong with me? Instead of, all right, that's a parenting style that's outdated and doesn't work anymore. Because a parent can still get the best out of their children, but yet feel supporting them, be affirming them, hearing the child's objections, talking through those things, not just, being overcritical. So when we look back at that situation, we can come away with a different understanding of it. And then that can feed into our containment statement that we use to refute the fear. And as we refute the fear and do it often enough, we convince the brain to change the belief system. And the next thing you know, we're doing it automatically and the old fear is extinguished. But it's a process.
Okay, so in terms of the application, like refuting the fear with the containment statement.
Yeah.
So when do you do that? Does that happen like when you're in the situation where you would have the stress response because of the fear, and then you kind of just subvert it, put in that containment instead, and you refute it, and then you just keep doing that, and then eventually it will extinguish the fear?
I think it happens in a lot of circumstances. It's nice to rehearse. It's nice to review the cognitive work a person is doing on a regular basis. I think someplace on the website we talk about putting up sticky notes or reminders so that we can make those refuting statements when we're not in the circumstance itself, so that we are preparing ourselves so when we get into those circumstances, we're more prepared to respond rather than just using it in those circumstances. So it's kind of like we're changing behavior over the course of time that then filters into those circumstances when we need it. So it's a gradual process. I would encourage you to do it as often as you think about it. For example, when I was looking at boundaries, I had reminders all over the place. This is what I'm doing and this is for that reason. This is why I'm not responsible for that person's feelings. This is why I'm not responsible for that person if they're feeling bad or if they've been mistreated. It's not my job to go in and rescue them, because going in and rescue them doesn't make them grow. So I'm actually doing them. So I had a lot of self-talk that I would apply as I'm preparing for boundaries. And then when I was in those situations, it became more automatic.
Okay. Yeah. So that's just where I'm at right now with the containment and fear extinguishing. I'm still not sure exactly. Like, for example, if I was to contain sometimes, because I don't have containment statements ready yet. Like, I haven't gotten that far with Stacy yet.
Okay, yeah.
So sometimes, like, if I have to contain and I'm in the moment, like I'm having anxiety or something, then sometimes, like, I can't come up with a containment statement. And then, like, I can't figure out, like, what the fear is, or I can't, like, refute it because I don't know exactly, or, like, I just can't figure it out. And then that will cause even more anxiety because, like, I can't figure out, like, a containment statement. So, like, what would I do in that situation if I'm trying to contain but I can't come up with like, a refutation?
I would say just be patient because you're going to get to all that work with Stacy. It's something we can't rush because, again, they're belief statements. We've had them likely for, from an early age. So just recognize that you want to make those changes, which is great, and you will be addressing those things at the right time, and it will take time to make those changes. So you're heading in the right direction. You're just not there yet.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because you need the foundational fear stuff to build effective containment statements. That's what I maintain anyway. That's my opinion. Until you have those foundational changing belief statements, trying to refute the fear is kind of a waste of time. It's like, the analogy we use at the website. It's like, and I remember working through this with one of my clients. I was trying to think of why is he not getting the scenarios I'm talking about, because he really struggled with containing fear. And then I remembered thinking, well, this is like, someone sitting you down in a chair with a loaded gun pointed at your head and then saying, well, don't worry. It's like, well, you're going to be worried because you're perceiving a threat. You have no guarantee he's not going to pull the trigger. So of course you're going to be worried. And so what we want to do is recognize that we need to empty the gun in order to feel safe. So if a person points an empty gun at your head, who cares if it's there? It really don't matter. So our job is to empty the threat of its bullets, essentially. And that's what we would do with going after the core threats is, all right, what am I afraid of? What are the bullets in that threat? And how can I get rid of those bullets to empty the threat? And then when we do that, then we extinguish your fear naturally anyway. So you're getting there. It's just that you're just not really, prepared there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. And then, I wanted to ask you about, in terms of your beliefs and the fears and stuff, I just want to have, an overall picture. Because I know there's, certain categories of things that we need to work on. For example, there's, the people-pleasing, and there's, not everybody, but, there's boundaries and people-pleasing. And I just want to know, what else there is. Because, and then there's, the self-esteem stuff. So, how many different things would you say, how many different overarching core fears do people usually have, or what are the different ones?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot of fears, and we can have them for different reasons and at different degrees of intensity. That's why doing the assessment is really important, because it gives the therapist a really good, fast overview of what mechanisms are driving the anxiety. Now, some people can have, a few main core fears, but there's often feeder fears that feed into them. So it's a matter of seeing what they are, where they rate, and what's driving them all, and then working through them. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all for every anxious person, because our circumstances are different, relationships are different, careers are different, how we think about things are different. This is where the therapist is really important to sort of sift through all that, going through the diagnostic process, and then saying, okay, here's the areas we're going to go after. Because, for example, boundaries will typically take care of self-esteem if you do it correctly, especially if you're adding the spiritual component. I think bringing boundaries and the spiritual component together are a surefire way of getting rid of self-esteem issues. Boundaries also allows us to live authentically, which is then we become less sensitive to criticism. So, being sensitive to criticism will also drop with boundaries and having a good spiritual view. And this, again, there's a lot of them. A lot of times there's perfectionism involved, because that usually accompanies being overly sensitive to criticism, because we don't want to be criticized. So the only way we think we can not be criticized is to do everything perfectly. So we usually adopt that. Then we've got unrealistic expectations. But you see, when we start addressing the boundaries and the spiritual approach, a lot of these things will just trickle off anyways, because they're all related. But again, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. That's something you'll have to talk about with your therapist. And typically your therapist will give you the top 10 list of what your core fears are and what your belief systems are. And as we work through those top 10, usually the others trickle off along the way anyways.
Yeah, that's actually exactly where I am with Stacy. He was supposed to send me that list for me or that form to fill out for my core fears and stuff.
Yeah.
And so we're supposed to go for that for our next session. I haven't gotten a list from him yet, though. I'll probably get it from him.
Yeah.
But,
you're in good hands with Stacy. You're in good hands with Stacy. He does a good job of that.
Yeah. Feeling pretty confident. I don't know if you can tell, but from last time, I'm just overall just much better, much less anxious. And last time I was speaking, I was so anxious, so symptomatic, but now everything, thank God, I'm just feeling a lot better. So yeah, thank you a lot for your help.
Oh, you're welcome. And the other thing too is it's really good to talk about these things, especially from an anxiety standpoint, because so many people have a negative view of anxiety, but anxiety is super common. And it's not that there's something wrong with us. It's just that we grew up anxious for certain reasons. So talking about it also relieves the pressure of having to keep it quiet. So the more we talk about these things, the easier it gets too. So I think, just be patient, do the work, and you'll be in a different place, and I think you'll be really happy.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. Appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. Andy, I don't think I've...
Piggyback on what Ali talked about with containment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Andy, I didn't see that it was a new person. Andy hasn't spoke yet, so I'm sorry.
He hasn't. Well, maybe I can speak with Andy, and then I can come back and we can speak before I wrap up for today.
Okay.
Sound okay?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Andy, did you have any questions?
No, I came in late and I signed up, but I came in late. Unfortunately, I missed it. I hope it's published somewhere, the talk. But if it's not, that's okay. I can catch it next time.
Okay. Well, we're going to be posting this on our YouTube channel and in the members area. So if you're a recovery support area, hear that first. So
Yeah, I've been with the program for, I don't know, I want to say a couple of months now, and I'm working with Stacy. So I just wanted to jump on the live presentations here as they're available.
oh, great. Yeah. And I was mentioning earlier, maybe you weren't in that. I'm thinking of doing things a little different. I'm looking at maybe setting aside 2 days a week to have either personal or, 2 or 3 people conversations during the week via Zoom to help people move along quicker. And I can be more responsive to the questions that's submitted. It's just because we get so many questions and it takes me a long time to write and prepare them. And since we're doing video, that takes a long time. So I wanted to do more of the face-to-face kind of question answer to try to help people move along quicker. So you can watch for that as the announcement comes up a while. But as I was mentioning to Ali, you're in good hands with Stacy, so I'm sure he'll get you to where you need to go.
Yeah, he's great. It's been a wonderful experience with him so far. Absolutely.
Oh, good. Yeah. He's a good guy. Okay, if you have no questions, then Foivos, did you want to follow up on what you were asking?
Because I had a question about containment as well.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, okay, we know, like, the flagpole example, right? That when we get a negative emotion, usually means that we're thinking in a certain manner.
Yeah.
So negative emotions most likely indicate unhealthy manners of thinking. Okay, so and these are like, perfectionism, worrying, this, that. So my question is that how do we gauge, like, how we successfully we contained? Because sometimes what happens with me is that I get upset, I catch myself, I'm saying to myself, stop, calm down, what's wrong here, the typical questions, and finding out, like, how am I thinking about things.
Yeah.
And then I follow along and do the containment, but because I'm such a perfectionist, just right thinker,
Yeah.
like, that's one of my biggest underlying factors. Like, I'm like, oh, did I do it right? If I did it right, like Jim, like in my mind, sometimes I have like those thoughts, like Jim says, keep yourself contained, or he was able to keep himself contained whenever he had symptoms, and I should be able to do the same stuff, like weird stuff like that. And it's like, how do I get over myself kind of worrying and obsessing of how well I'm containing?
Yes, right. Yeah. And that's a common one. As a general statement, what we say is it's not about perfection. It's about doing it right more times than we don't do it right. Because again, the goal is to, gradually improve, not suddenly improve. So, and a lot of times as we're working on our behavior changes, we are going to find ourselves down the wrong road. That's just how it is, because those are automatic behaviors. They fire fast and quick. And sometimes they're subconscious. We don't even know we're down the road until we stop and say, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing here? So we just want to get more close to that decision intersection with practice. So when we want to become more aware of when we're running down the road sooner than later. And when we find ourselves, we don't want to punish ourselves and say, okay, I just messed up. This is bad. It's like, okay, I caught myself. I'm going to try to catch myself a little bit earlier next time. It's all about gradual change to the goal, not sudden change or perfect change. Because if you're striving for perfection, you're not going to get there. Nothing's perfect. And as you're working with your therapist, you're going to probably talk about perfection and why it's kind of an elusive goal. We want to become okay with not being perfect because, again, nothing's perfect. There's nothing wrong with striving to do our best, but if we're beating ourselves up and being anxious about it, then we got to change that belief system. And I think, as you continue to work and you address that belief system, you'll find that it's easier to not be so concerned about doing things right. And so, again, that's the process that needs to take time in order to unfold. And there's a lot of reasons why we have that mindset. And most often it'll stem back from, again, where we came from. And so by going back and looking at those situations and realizing, wow, I made a wrong conclusion there. I concluded that was my problem, that there was something wrong with me. That's why they reacted the way I did. But in fact,
it was my life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of us. That's the thing. A lot of us come from difficult backgrounds that set us up on the course for anxiety because we just didn't have the best of upbringings. And even though our parents loved us, they often were brought up by parents who raised them the way they did, and they raised us that way, and here we go. So when we look
For me,
back, sorry?
I'm sorry. Like I wanted to say that for me was even a little bit kind of more weird because most of my struggle, like my parents showed me love. They were not like, they had some overcriticalness and stuff like that, but
Yep.
they were mostly loving.
Yep.
For me, it was like a huge dichotomy happening because in my house there was a lot of love,
Hmm.
but outside of my house, everybody like rejected me, bullied me, and
Yep.
like I was not able to conclude like what's going on with me, basically,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Another
I concluded obviously that I'm not good enough, which fuels those behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah, and another common factor that goes with all of that is they often love us so much they overprotect us.
Yeah,
They try to make
exactly.
our lives smoother and easier, but what that does, it robs us of the opportunity for us to fend for ourselves.
Yeah, it's self-soothe. Yeah,
Yeah, and so that combination is a common one. But the good news is we can work through that by having a different view. So
but
just like, yep,
I was mostly like regarding the containment question. It's not like I do not have an issue mostly like catching myself, so to speak. I actually think that I overcatch myself. The thing is like I do the containment, and then how do I gauge its success almost? Like sometimes I'm anxious, I contain, and
yeah,
I see like a 20% decrease in my anxiousness, and I kind of view this as a failure. While or like my behaviors, like because I've heard you say, and of course maybe that's a misunderstanding on my part, like keep ourselves contained.
yeah,
That phrase of
yeah,
like keeping ourselves contained. Containment is a tool that helps us keep calm. So my goal is to keep myself calm all the time. So when I have that belief regarding containment, so whenever I'm like anxious or afraid, or I figure out like, oh, this is black and white thinking, that's emotional reasoning,
hmm,
the cognitive distortions, and I contain them, and I do not see much of a difference regarding calmness.
yeah,
That's where I'm like, oh no, like I'm not good at containing.
yeah. And that's where the perfectionism is kind of providing a barrier. And
Yeah.
that's why we have to ease off on that. It's a gradual process over time. I remember
But
when I was
shouldn't I
starting
know
to,
better by now? Like I've been using containment all these bouts, and I made it. Every time it took me like a year to recover almost, but
yeah,
uh, I think that I should be able to contain and be okay with it. Be really good actually at it.
yeah,
That's
I don't think you're convinced of some of the statements you're saying yet. It hasn't translated. It's in your head, hasn't translated to the heart, and that just comes through. I think a little bit more investigation on the underlying factors, so that the things
yeah.
you're saying to yourself, you're convinced of. You're just not using them to quell fear, and so that'll be one piece as well. And
Mm,
and the other thing too is I remember in the early stages of my recovery, it was a constant tug of war. Like I just felt like I was
yeah.
in a constant battle, tug of war. My old
Me too.
behavior is pulling one direction and I'm trying to pull in the other. It just felt so much like a battle. But as I persevered and caught myself and offered myself grace, again, it came down to not being perfect at it, but being more consistent with doing the right things than allowing myself not to, and offering myself grace that it's going to take time. And as time unfolded, it became more natural. The older ones stopped pulling in the wrong direction. It just you're probably in that transition right now, and I think because you've had some rebounds, it's the underlying factor work that's caused the rebounds, not necessarily your understanding of stress.
Yeah, and like, but that's the thing. Like, because I understand what you're saying, because I experienced it. Like,
Yeah,
containment was 24/7, moment by moment in the beginning,
yeah,
and then as it eased off, it was better. Like, I've been through this. Like, that's the thing that, like, uh, but yeah, the limbic lag that you referred to, maybe that's like playing a role here. And also, the other thing, like, I have that thing where, like, I view the final goal of anxiety disorder recovery as that perfect place almost.
hmm.
Like, for example, like people who are fully recovered, I view them as like they, and this is black and white thinking, right? They never do black and white thinking. They never do perfectionistic anything ever again. Like, because like I had that issue, and many times also, that we change behaviors. Okay, what does that mean? We completely eradicate them. That's what that means in my mind, you
Yeah.
know? And it's like, okay, this people pleasing, for example, needs to be completely eradicated, so it doesn't even show up at all, ever again. So that's the end goal. And it's like, it's almost like an immeasurable goal. Like, I don't think, because most of my behaviors fire subconsciously.
Yeah.
Consciously, if I had the conscious control, I wouldn't have anxiety disorder,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because it's like, it's just like automatic things. All of a sudden, I just become emotionally upset. And I'm
Yeah.
like, why is, like, okay, habituation, yes, they become automatic, and I overuse them sometime in my life, but it always felt like I always had to contain those behaviors. They were never like changed. And I this is like another thing that I wanted to touch on. Like, when you say we change the behaviors, like, what do you mean? You never do black and white thinking ever again in your life, for example? It just doesn't show up ever?
I think the more proficient you get at doing that, yeah, they just don't show up. Like when I look back at the changes I made in self-esteem and boundaries, I don't even think of the old ways anymore. When I go into a place, doesn't even enter my mind because they're so automatic. And I think you're probably in that space where it's not automatic yet. And I think there still needs to be that underlying factor work to get to that place that what you're saying to yourself is convincing. I don't think you're convinced yet that some of the things you're saying are true.
So it's like the old beliefs are still driving the behaviors. That's why they keep on popping up.
Yes, and that's why it feels like they're so strong still, is because the ones you're using to contain with aren't that convincing yet.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so so what would be a healthy expectation of behavioral change?
I'm sorry, you cut out there just for a minute. What was your question?
Okay, so what would be a healthy expectation of being done with behavioral change? Like,
Being
we never
done?
worry again. Yeah, be
Yeah.
done. Like you.
Yeah, in certain situations that you used to be anxious and you're not anxious anymore and you haven't even thought about it.
So
that would be an
like,
indication of being done.
regarding cognitive distortions, where would you say you are right now? Like,
Well, I'm
you're
sure
done?
I'm sure I still have some of them in certain situations because I haven't done absolutely everything in my life. There's things that I will be working on probably till the day I die because of the past, but they don't create anxiety issues with me. And so there's certain areas that I'm completely done with that I don't even think of anymore. For example, symptoms they never enter, and don't even enter my mind unless I'm talking to clients about symptoms. So all that's gone. Stress, not even an issue for me. Some of the old, like I said, self-esteem things, boundary things are all gone. Perfectionism is history for me. I still struggle a little bit with drivenness because I'm passionate about what I do, but I keep that in check. I make sure I get enough rest and so on and so forth. So there's going to be some areas you're going to be working on, but the overall goal is you don't want to be struggling with anxiety or symptoms. And that's, if you're not struggling with anxiety or symptoms, then you've done a good job of level 2 recovery work.
Because I've had experienced 3 years of reprieve.
Yeah.
And 3 very difficult years of reprieve. Yeah. And you actually interviewed me back then.
Yes, I remember that.
Success story. Yeah, as a success story. Unfortunately, I rebounded twice after that. And like, the whole thing is like, so I guess like with the 7 principles, because like that's where it's at, of recovery. Like, you just keep on practicing those principles until you're gone, basically, right?
Well, it would be, you should know the principles by now. It'd be really going after the underlying factors. For example, if you look back at the rebounds, are you able to pinpoint why?
Most of the cases, yeah, because like for me, it's both what happened before the rebound and because we can also get acute stress and turn it into chronic, by worrying and fretting and this and that. So with me, like, for sure, one big component is not being afraid of the struggle, because each time I get symptoms, I'm afraid of what if I cross the threshold? What if this? What if that? Whatever it is, or this reminds me of the struggle, and my Amy just keeps on spamming fearful messages.
Yeah,
and like, even if I have like, that's what I said to Larry. Like, let's say I recover tomorrow, I'm good, I'm fine. And 5 years down the line, I just experienced a week of symptoms where I'm
Yep.
capable, like my mind is capable of turning this again into a rebound. And like, of course, that's not full recovery.
Yep.
And so the thing is, like, I want to get over this whenever I get sick, because I had a cool way of viewing it before, like, and it eased me a little bit. It's like, what stress have I gathered here? That's what I'm gonna get. I gathered X amount of stress. Y amount of recovery time is required. That's how I viewed it. But the threshold thing really, really got me, you understand what I'm trying to say here.
Yes. Yeah. 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 And that would be an area to work on, because I
Hello?
think it is your. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I cut off, right?
Yes. Yeah. You're cutting out there a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's an area that certainly would need to be worked on, is your concern about going back into symptoms for a prolonged period of time. So that's part level 1 recovery there. And there are some underlying factors that would set that up. So your stress is becoming chronic again. So those would be the areas I'd be investigating with you, so you have a better understanding of what sent you back.
And like, one thing that I think sends me back is me not taking care of myself, and like not doing ongoing stress management,
Yep. Yep. I would agree.
like decompressing through every day. Yeah, because like if I decompress through every day, maybe I'll get a less of a hyperstimulated state, like down the road, which I would be able to reverse it, and then I would be able to have more confidence in myself regarding not going back.
Yep, I would agree. Yep. That's why stress management is such a big deal, because if we're not symptomatic, then we usually don't pay much attention to anxiety. And we can stop being symptomatic by regular stress management, making sure we don't let chronic stress build up.
Yeah, so we have more confidence that if we get symptoms, it's not chronic stress also, and it's like maybe a buildup of 2 weeks of stress.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately for us, I'm going to have to go. I can't sit much longer. My hip is driving me crazy. So,
Understandable.
yeah, but I would encourage you to talk with Larry about those things, and maybe jump on another, Zoom call a little bit down the road when I start holding them more regularly. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish you a good recovery as well with your hip surgery. I wish Marilyn the best. I'll keep both of you in my prayers.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for taking 3-4 hours almost.
Almost 4 hours, yes. Well, thanks for being a participant, and thank you as well. Thank you for being bold enough to have these conversations so that other people can benefit as well. And God bless you all, and I'm sure we'll chat again. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Bye-bye for now.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye,
You too.
everyone.
Bye-bye.